Hello and welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast, the space where ideas turn into actions and dreams become reality. I'm your host, Beenish Mirza, and in each episode, I will sit down with some really wonderful, incredible women who've taken a spark of inspiration and transformed into something so meaningful. These are real stories of purpose, passion, and perseverance. So wherever you're listening from, settle in and get ready to be inspired. This week, I sit down with Ambata Kazi, a Muslim writer, a creative, and an editor. She's the voice of Black American Muslim communities, and she's talking to us about her book, Far Away From Here, a story that's set in New Orleans post-Hurricane Katrina, and she intertwines the stories of three individuals. She reminds us how we are not defined by the mistakes we made and how actually there is so much power in turning to our communities for that support and how we are not separated from the communities and cultures we are part of. She teaches us the need to be open-minded, non-judgmental with our actions, with our words, to be inclusive of all regardless of where they are in their faith. And she leaves us with the thought, you can't give up on people. Inspired by the feeling of homesickness, I can't wait for you to hear this episode and let me know what you think in the comments below. Hi Ambata, so great to have you here and thank you so much for joining the Coaching Chapters podcast. Could you just introduce yourself and your book to our wonderful audience?
Okay. Well, my name is Ambata Kazi. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States. I was born and raised there from many generations in New Orleans. I come from a family of writers and readers. My father was a writer and an editor as well. So my first novel, Far Away From Here, has been recently published. I've been writing professionally for over a decade in different formats, and I've been writing creatively fiction for at least 5 years now.
Wow, fantastic. So there's so many layers to you already. It sounds like you've been quite a creative for quite a long time. So tell us more about, a bit more about your background, actually. You mentioned your dad was also a creative into writing. Is that a lot of where your inspiration for this book came from?
Well, I think mostly inspiration. Just even though like not everyone in my family is a writer, like I grew up around a lot of storytelling. So there was a lot of family storytelling. So that was always a part of my life, and so that's just kind of just been there from the beginning. Just having those stories, and in writing this book. A lot of it came about from homesickness. I was living in Connecticut at the time, and I was, just really missing, my home and my family and my community that I was raised with. And so, in thinking about, I was also finishing my Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and so I was thinking about what type of project I wanted to work on. And for my I was ready to work on a novel, but I wasn't sure what. And I just wanted to write something about where I was from because I was, really homesick. And so it just came about, the story and just in the writing of it, that it was a way for me to kind of reconnect with the community that I was away from. And I think that I didn't intend to, but in writing it, it really became reflective of that fullness of community that I experienced. It started out with just one character, then it became three characters, and then also bringing in, the different like minor characters into the story as well, bringing those voices in as well. Yeah.
Homesickness, that's such a strong emotion or feeling,
Yeah.
especially from an emotional intelligence perspective. It's always really interesting to know what that even means. Do you mind just sharing a little bit more what homesickness meant and felt like for you?
Oh, well, for me in particular, so in New Orleans, it's in the U.S. South, right? So it's very humid, very warm, right? We have hurricanes, which is, central to the story as well. And then I was living in Connecticut, right, is New England. So it was winter time where I was facing my first winter, and I was nervous, because I didn't know what to expect. I had never really experienced like, snowstorms or anything like that. And so I really feel like that added to the experience, like just like, oh, I want to go home. I don't want I don't want to be here. I don't want to experience this. And then not to say anything bad, but, people are different, right, depending on where they're from, right? So I don't know how familiar you are with, like, the US, but you can probably imagine, like, you go to certain areas, people are like, "Oh, the people are like this in this area." And so in the South, we're known for being, more talkative, talk to strangers, people come up and talk to you. And so I didn't realize it until I wasn't there that I never really felt alone in New Orleans, right? Because you could always just start chatting with somebody on the street. They would stop you and just chat about the weather or whatever. And so there was always that element. But in Connecticut, it's the Northeast, and I think the colder temperature has a way of making people be a little bit quieter into themselves. So there was no chatting in the street. No one would just start up a conversation. And in my attempts to make conversations with people, they, were really thrown off by that because people just don't do that. And that's just the culture. And so that added to the isolation. So not only is it literally cold, but people were just, not very friendly. And so all of that had me just missing that the literal warmth, and also just that warmth of people, just feeling like you can talk to people and make friends, or, just chat with people. So that for me is a big part of homesickness, is not feeling like you can talk to anybody or even look someone in the eye and smile or something. So that was a big part for me with that. Yeah.
And I could definitely relate. The UK is very, very cold. So I could definitely relate when you said that. And similarly, the UK in itself, it is a tiny place, but we have so many different areas, so many different villages. And there are those stereotypes as to which towns and which cities are a little bit friendlier. And then thinking back to what you said about homesickness, particularly in the UAE, majority of the people here are expats, so they are away from their homes. A feeling of homesickness, I think it dips in and out as expat women here in particular, in different ways. So thank you for bringing that to the conversation. And coming back to your book then, far away from here, what sort of emotions were you hoping to trigger in this story that you were writing?
Well, mostly, so the characters, they're in their very early 20s. So, and I was thinking about that stage in my life. When I was writing the book, I was when I first started, right, I was in my mid-30s, and just thinking back to that stage of my life when you're, a young adult, and you're being, now you're responsible for yourself, right? And just remembering that feeling of, this it's scary, right? Like, okay, I have to make decisions for myself, and I have to make good decisions. And so I guess I have a soft spot for that age, because I remember those feelings, and the insecurities. And so that was a main theme of the book, right? Facing adulthood, right? And then thinking with these characters, especially, they had made some choices in their earlier life that they regret. And so that is also, I think, part of like our faith, right? Like when we, have to come to terms with choices that we've made that we regret, what can you do about that, right? You can't change it, right? So now you have to try to move forward. And that can sometimes be an obstacle as well, right? Like we talk about, like, you ask Allah's forgiveness, right? And you're supposed to trust that He has forgiven you. But have you forgiven yourself? Right. And if you can't forgive yourself, how do you move forward from there? And so that's what I was seeing with these three characters, is that they were all like stuck in that zone of like, okay, I can't move past these decisions I've made in the past, and I want to, but I don't know how. Right. And so those overcoming those challenges, and that's where like the family and community aspects come in, because it's also, I think, definitely a Western idea of like, you're an adult, you're an individual, and you operate on your own, which is not in keeping, like for African Americans, we're typically more, community oriented. So there's that clash, right, between, oh, I'm supposed to be an individual, but we come from communal cultures, right? And then within Islam too, as Muslims, right, we tend to think more communally. So within that, there's also that challenge of like, what if you're in community, but the way you want to do things maybe is putting you at odds with the community that raised you, right? So trying to figure out how am I myself, right, my individual self, but also within my community, my faith tradition, right? How do I establish my own identity with all of these things, telling me how to be, right? You have one side saying, oh, you're on your own, you can do what you want, right? But then we come from these cultures that say, no, wait, no, you're a part of us, right? And we want to have a role in shaping, the type of adult that you come to be. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about with this story and wanting to write about, right? Those challenges of um, forming your own identity, but informed by your faith and informed by your family and your traditions.
Yeah, that's so interesting actually, because it is so complex navigating that, right? Like a sense of belonging to a community, but also trying to navigate what you want to do with the support of the community. And I think as women in particular, I think it's such a common thread around not forgiving yourself. And actually, there is so much beauty in turning to those circles of sisterhood, of community, of family, of faith to be able help with that navigation, that growth, those challenges. So it sounds very interesting. So could you tell us a bit more about the three characters? We'd love to get to know a bit more of who they are and what makes the
So the main character is Fatima. She's the lead character of the story, and she left New Orleans before during Hurricane Katrina. Right, she left the city, as many people did when the hurricane was coming, and she left I guess in grief because she had lost her fiance. He was murdered, and so part of her leaving is her decision, like, to not ever go back because of dealing with that grief that she's facing. And so the novel starts off. It's 5 years after Hurricane Katrina, and she's like, I'm never going back there. But she gets a call from her what would have been her mother-in-law, right? Her fiance's mother, asking her to come and stay with her because she is sick and wants someone to be with her. And so she returns reluctantly, right, to help this woman, who would have been her mother-in-law. And in coming back, she reconnects with two of her childhood friends. So there's Tahani, which was her childhood friend, and they've lost touch, in the years that they've been away. And in that time, Tahani has made some choices that she regrets, right? Um, Entering a relationship with someone and then having children and finding herself as a single mother with two kids at a very young age. And she has also distanced herself from her family, so she's pretty much on her own raising these two kids. And then there's the third character is Saif, which is the cousin of Fatima's intended, right? And he played a role in his cousin's death. And so she is at odds with him because she blames him, um for her fiance's death. And so it's these three characters coming back into each other. So it's mostly Fatima with Tahani and Fatima with Saif, not necessarily the three of them together too much in the story. And it started out as just going to be from Fatima's perspective, right? Her coming back to New Orleans and her interactions with Tahani and Saif and then these other characters in the story. But then as I was writing, I became really interested in Tahani's story and Saif's story. And I felt that they deserve to have more of their own stories as well. In doing that, it was a way for me to explore like these different perspectives, right? Um, and they are vastly different from each other, right? So in thinking about like uh just to broaden the perspectives of like, okay, so if you're writing about like, in my case, Black Muslims, right? Like I didn't want it to just be necessarily like one story as if like, oh, this is what it means to be a Black Muslim in America, right? There's plenty of different ways, to be. And so with these three characters being able to show three different realities, was I was glad that the story opened up for me like that. I think it makes for a much richer story.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with a lot of people actually who often say to me, I could write a book. My story is like a movie. What's happened to me is like a movie. And just hearing you talk about the three different characters and what it's like to be a Black American for them in that particular time. And, touching back on the piece you spoke about community and homesickness and how important it is for you, how much of your own experiences, your own systems, your own um, lived relationships, what's your storytelling within your book?
Mm, well, so my own personal story is very different from the characters. At the time of their age, I was already married, so I was living very differently, but I could relate to the characters and their struggles because I grew up in New Orleans and met a lot of people from different walks of life. And for me, so I am a convert to Islam. I became Muslim as an adult, a young adult. And um, something I've come to realize now, like I've been Muslim for, almost more than 20 years now. But when I was very new to the religion, my ideas about what it meant to be Muslim were very like narrow, like because I was coming into the religion, I just wanted to do everything, quote unquote, right. And I didn't know a lot about like how Muslims actually lived their lives. And so it was surprising for me to meet Muslims and to, you know, some doing things that we would clearly say these are haram things, but it's like, but you're a Muslim and you identify as a Muslim and you give me salams and you're kind to me, but it's like, but wait, but you're doing things that, I thought we weren't supposed to do, and I just had a very like black and white, clear, understanding. And then to realize like, oh, the way people live their lives is not black or white, right? Like it's much more to it than that. So a lot of it I get of these characters comes about from the experiences that I've had meeting people and how that caused me to, um, you know, uh, what do you not I don't wanna say change, but like to I have to have relationships with these people and I can't be judgmental of people, right? And so to open my understanding of people and to see how people are trying, right? To they want to live good lives, but they maybe are making bad choices, don't know how to stop making bad choices, right? And that can be difficult to understand. But it's like, okay, well, we have to, right? We have to try to understand where people are coming from, so that we can, if we want to be any type of, guidance for people, then, you can't guide people if you're like judging and criticizing, right? And so, and just thinking about people's faith journeys, right? Like how people, what people are struggling with and how they're using faith to help them, but they also still need some help to get out of sometimes of certain situations. So yeah, that was I was able to relate to the characters and just in my experiences, like just being around other Muslims and hearing from, their experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it is so true, isn't it, that actually we, within our own communities or our own faith, have a bias as to the way people should be, the way people should live. But actually, there's so many textures, so many layers, different systems, different lived experiences as to what makes people who they are. And it was just really nice to hear how that's influenced your own thinking, your own open mindedness, your own curiosity through how you navigate your faith and people you meet, but actually it's helped you in your character building for your book as well. So, how important was it for you to write not just a Black American book, but a Black American Muslim story?
So for me, mostly because, and I think especially like in New Orleans, we're a small community, and I think in America, in terms of like Muslim narratives, right, that often African Americans are not considered, in when we talk about Muslims, right? Um, when you say Muslim, a lot of people think Arab or South Asian, but to know that there were African American Muslim communities, before this mass migration of Arabs and South Asians in America, right? That we were already practicing Islam, 1930s, 1940s, then that's something that a lot of people don't know. So it definitely was important to I think a lot of times of writing and like writing from that perspective is basically like that we do exist, right? We exist, we're practicing Islam and we're living our lives, and if I don't write these stories, then who will, and just that the importance of telling our own stories, right, as opposed to having someone tell our stories because they're not going to um it's just not the same. I don't wanna say they're not gonna get it right, but it's not going to be as full as it could be, and anytime you're writing about someone that you're not from that culture, it's gonna be different, right? It's gonna have that kind of distance between it, and so just to be able to write, from that experience and to people who, have similar experiences as well is very valuable as a writer.
So, who is your book for, and what are you hoping they take away from your story?
Mm. Well, I mean, in general, I always say, my stories are for whoever wants to read them. But I guess if there's a first, type of reader that I think of, I think of the people who um, either feel or have been straight up told that there's not a place for them in Islam. They're like, that they're not Muslim enough or anything, or the way they're anything about the way they're living their lives. And just to, at least that's when I first started out with writing, definitely that's what I was thinking about, like, those people who are kind of on the outskirts or have been pushed to the outskirts, and, just thinking about how they can come back into the fold of Islam, right? And because I just feel really strongly like you can't give up on people, right? And I feel like it's like our obligation to try to bring people back, and to make a space, for people, right? So I guess in terms of my reader, yeah, so just yeah, that's always a hard question to answer because definitely I feel like it's for whoever, and I think that um people will find, things within the book to connect with, whether it's one character or not or another. And that's some of the feedback that I've gotten from early readers, which has been really beneficial to know that people from very different walks of life have, found some connections in the stories because I feel like they really are in a lot of ways still universal. You know, um, we all come from families and communities, and we all have these complex relationships, and we also all know what it's like to, as a young person to be like, okay, now I have to, make a life for myself. And what is that going to look like? And the fears and all of those things that come with it. So I think those are universal themes.
Absolutely. And I loved it when you said you can't give up on people. And you alluded before when you were telling us a little bit more about actually, we're not defined by our mistakes and there is a way out. And actually, in this community, in the story that you're telling, is a community aspect to it. And so, what would your advice be, when people do give up on themselves? And particularly when it comes to turning to the community, what advice would you have for those sort of individuals?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is, don't ever stop praying, right? You don't have to have community to pray, right? You just need a space to do that, right? So, um, if it comes to just focusing on the rituals just for yourself, that can be a great way to sustain yourself because you're not alone, right? You're actually in communion with Allah when you're praying, right? And that is the ultimate relationship, right? Um, I used to hear like when growing up, like, you come into this world alone and you leave alone. But then thinking as a Muslim, like, no, you come into the world with Allah and you leave with Allah, right? And so that's your constant companion. So like you can always like have that connection through prayer, and you don't need community, right, for that, right? And so that foundation, I guess, of faith that I've come to see is like really important, because people will disappoint you, right? You will get your heart broken, you will lose people, like you will grieve, and you will have all of these experiences. But you if you have your faith, then you have something to hold on to, right? We talk about the rope of Allah, right? You have to hold on to that, because and I've experienced it. I know other people have those times where you're like, oh, I know what this means, not anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely. I always say that to myself. I said, if I didn't have my faith, I don't know where I'd be, because that holding on to that rope is a real, a real metaphor. You live by it.
Yeah. And that's what I saw with these characters, right? And that's why it was important with these characters, that despite everything that they were going to, that they had some connection to their faith, right? Whether it was prayer or something else. And I think for all three characters, they're I write about them praying, and how no matter what they're going through in life, that they follow the rituals, right? And how that sustains them, and having that foundation, they can then build from there, right? But sometimes we forget that. But definitely, I would say for anyone who's struggling, just don't give up on prayer.
And it's so wonderful. It's such a wonderful reminder in the way you said it, because actually, a lot of us pray. A lot of us pray regularly, but that whole you don't come by yourself. You don't leave by yourself. You come with Allah. You leave with Allah, and that's so wonderfully put. And it's made me very curious to finally read your book and understand a bit more about the characters in your book. So, what are you hoping are the key takeaways, aside from, some of the stuff you've given already, that you're hoping readers take away from this story?
Mm. Well, ultimately, I hope that they will have a greater understanding of lives and realities that may be different from their own. So if like for Muslim readers who you know, these types of stories, these types of realities might be very different from their own, but that hopefully they will see those commonalities. And also, just like, let's say you're in the masjid, you see people all the time, you don't know who they are or where they come from, right? And we can very, very easily, make assumptions about people, right? But we all have these stories with us, right? And so you see a person in a certain situation. Well, what do you know about them, right? So when I hope with a story like this, with these complexities, that people will, have that in mind when they meet people from different walks of life, like all the things that they are carrying within them, right? So you know, if you like, again, like, yeah, so if like, let's say you're at the masjid, like just commending someone for coming to the masjid, because you have no idea the anxiety that someone might have faced to get to that point. And so that is commendable, that for them to make that effort. And yeah, so just because especially now with everything, to have more compassion for each other, you know and to yeah, just to know that, we have these stories within us, and they've shaped us for better and worse, right? But we're still standing, right? And so that again, no one is, don't give up on anyone. Yeah.
And so, if you could just tell us a little bit more about, outside of book, what sort of work are you doing? It sounds like you're doing a lot in this space around the community and about feeling a sense of belonging and supporting African Americans, particularly Muslim African Americans in the US. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about what you're doing in that space and how people can connect with your work?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the things that I do, I'm an editor with a online literary journal, Sapelo Square. And this is an online space for Black identifying Muslims. And so this is I've been working with them for 5 years now, and is something that I feel is still very important to have this space for that prioritizes Black Muslim voices. Again, like I said, we're marginalized within a marginalized community, right? And so, in my time working with Sapelo Square, I've seen how beneficial the space is for people. We get a lot of response from our readers who, they feel seen, they feel heard, because a lot of times in the greater spaces, our experiences, if they're mentioned at all, it's just like a side note, right? It's so important to have a space where it's like at the center, which is what we do at Sapelo Square. And then in addition to that, I'm also a member of the Muslim Writers Salon, and this is a global Muslim writers community. And I host co-writing sessions. So I write, to write with other members. And when I'm able to, I try to do like some workshops or other types of activities to get that creative energy going for other writers. And yeah, so that's really important to me. Like, I wouldn't say I've made it right in any sense. I have just the first book out, but people look to they get inspiration from that, and so I do feel like an obligation, right, to give advice and encouragement for new writers, right, and to bring more writers, Muslim writers especially, and get their stories out there. So anything that I can do to help other Muslim writers, because I want to see everyone succeed.
Yeah, nice. Sounds like you've got yourself busy in a number of different spaces, and they all sound very exciting. So thank you. And so, what does the future hold? What are you working on in the future? Will there be another book?
Yeah, inshallah, I hope so. I've kind of dabbling in different projects right now because I like just to where I get to. I feel like yes, this is the one I want to work on because that's what came about with this book. I actually had a very different idea of what my first book was going to be about, but it when it came time to write it, I wasn't feeling the connection. And like I said, like I was like, oh, I want to write something about New Orleans, and so that's what kind of that was a fire, right, that was lit for me. And so now I'm just considering what is gonna give me that spark. So I have a few different, ideas that I'm kinda toying around with right now.
Yeah, it's exciting. Can't wait to, keep following you to see what work you do. And so, coming back to Far Away From Here, your book, where can people get hold of it in the US and the globally?
Yeah, so in the US, there's bookshop.org, there's Amazon, Barnes& and Noble. If you search the title, it, the book is distributed through Simon& and Schuster, so on their page, they have links to different sellers like Books A Million and some other booksellers, and also in bookstores. I don't know all of them right now, but I know a few have it in stock in their stores, and that's something that I always remind people, because I do recommend supporting, local bookstores, and people think, "Oh, well, they don't have it in stock," but you can always get them to order a copy of the book, and you can pick it up from and support your local bookseller. So I always remind people that you can call ahead and say, "I want this book," and they will order it for you and typically have it in a few days for you. Internationally, it is available as an ebook, and it is available on Amazon for pre-order, and for physical copies. And that's all I know right now. I haven't seen it on Bookshop UK, unfortunately. I'm not sure why, but I haven't seen it there. But but yeah, so that's what I know in terms of distribution.
Great, thank you. I honestly can't wait to read it. And thank you so much for sharing your story and giving insights into the book. It was so wonderful to hear your version of what you were hoping to get out of it and some of the themes coming into playing with the characters and the stories. So, good luck with it. I've seen some really amazing reviews already on the book. So, yeah, thank you for this time and sharing your journey and part of your book with us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Coaching Chapters podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired and reminded you of what's possible when you follow your own calling, your own passion. If you loved this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. And remember, every big journey starts with a small idea, a small passion, and a small calling for purpose.